Welcome to an RPG in a Box Basics video tutorial. In this video, we're going to take a look at one of the new features that was just added to RPG in a Box as of filming this video, which is playsets. So what I'm going to do in this video is a couple of things. I'm first of all going to talk about the limitations that you need to be aware of when using playsets, and there's quite a few to sort of be mindful of, and I'll show those. I'm also going to talk about how to make them and how to use them, with some tips about how you might use them. I'm then also going to talk about where they're stored when you save them and how they work internally, like how they actually work. So there's a few things to cover, so let's get started. So before we get into anything practical, let me talk about a couple of things to be aware of, limitations, but also just things to be aware of. The first limitation is that right now, as of filming this video, they are currently a Steam-only feature. However, they are eventually planned to come to other platforms like Epic and itch in the future, so there won't be a Steam exclusive forever. However, just at this point in time, the first limitation to be aware of is they are a Steam-only feature. So obviously, if you are an Epic or itch user watching this video, it will be of limited use to you right now beyond just mere curiosity. However, if you're a Steam user, obviously you will get the most benefit out of this video. The other thing to know about playsets is that they are a in-engine tool rather than an in-game feature. So they're not something that your games can make use of. They're something that you use while making your game. They, in essence, are a tool for the map editor that facilitates making maps quicker and easier. So what are playsets? Playsets are essentially, if you've ever used the Neverwinter Nights toolset, then you might be familiar with the way the first Neverwinter Nights game toolset worked, where when you made maps, you had lots of different sort of prefabs, sort of tiles that had lots of different things in them. So you might have a forest that had segments where there was a bit of grass and some trees and maybe some rocks already placed in the thing that you're placing down. So you didn't have to place everything piece by piece. So playsets are kind of that same functionality where what you can do is you can pre-make lots of little groups of things that you can then repeat, like stamp around your map. And you'll see this as we make a couple in this video. You'll see what they are. The thing I love about RPG in a Box's playsets, however, is the one thing that sort of I wished was in the original Neverwinter Nights, is that while it was great to have these sort of groups of assets that you could just place down in one go, the problem was you could never change the original assets, not easily anyway, not within the editor. You'd have to do some modeling, you know. You couldn't really change easily the modules, as they were called. So you were kind of just stuck making the same looking worlds because every tile set was locked to how it looked. The nice thing about RPG in a Box is you can make your own playsets. So the creativity and the individuality goes up through the roof. So you get the best of both worlds with RPG in a Box. You can make your maps painstakingly by hand, but you can also make little groups of things that you can, you know, create your own tile sets, whether that be for just making a map quickly and easily, or whether it be for just repeating something that you're going to be using an awful lot, a bit like a function. So like you would do with a function in code, where you'd reuse the same code over and over again, so you'd put it in a function. Playsets are kind of the same thing, but for map geometry. You know, so you want to use the same room over and over again, or you want to use the same section of forest over and over again, whatever, right? So as I say, I'll give you a couple of examples in a second. So what we're going to do is I'm going to make a new map, and I'm going to call this playsets. And the idea is I'm just going to put my playsets in this map. So if I click OK, I'm going to leave this map intentionally blank and just use this map for making and saving playsets. And I'll talk about the two benefits of doing that. You don't have to do this. This is not a requirement to make playsets. I'm doing this because I find this to be a workflow that works for me. And if it works for someone else, then that's great. I can, you know, share it. But you can obviously work your own way. So how to make a playset then? So what you would do is you place down your tiles and objects and characters that you want to be in a playset. So here, for example, we'll make a 3x3 grass ground, and maybe we'll put a square path in the middle. And let's put like a crossroads in or something like that. Something, hiding that place. There we go. Something like that. And then maybe we could put an object in. So let's put a tree in one of the corners. And then maybe a path or something off to the side. Okay. Not a path, sorry, a sign off to the side. Let's just do that. Something like that, right? We'll just make something quick and simple. So once you've placed down the things you want, it can also contain a character. So let's put Sarah in, for example. Once you've got the things on you want, you just go to the select tool, you select everything. So just quickly select everything. Make sure everything is selected, because obviously anything that's not selected will not be saved in the playset. So make sure everything is highlighted in this sort of blue color. And then once you've selected a couple of things or a few things, whatever, you'll get this button here that will suddenly appear in the top right. And it will say Save as Playset. And you also got the Help button, which will take you to the Playsets page in the documentation explaining what a playset is. Obviously, I'm also doing that as well. So you can either click this or you can press the P key on your keyboard. Personally, I prefer to press the P key, because then I can just work really quickly. I can just select things, press P, and then we're off. So the moment I press P, up comes, or the moment you click this button, whichever, this will come up. And it's going to ask you to give your playset a name. Now, you can call them whatever you like. A naming convention that I think would be useful is to put in brackets, first of all, the dimension of your playset. So in my case, 3 by 3. That will just tell me from a visual, without sort of having to guess, that will tell me how large this playset's going to be. So it's 3 across and 3 down, right? Then if you want to, you could put the theme in. So if you wanted multiple playsets that were all connected to the same theme, so like multiple playsets that, had to do with a forest, so you could, group them together. And then you put the name in of the playset. So in my case, Crossroads or something like that. I might put Crossroads in, right? Something like that. Obviously, as I say, you can call this whatever you want. I'm suggesting that as a good naming system because it will give you multiple information per tile set, the size of it, the theme of it, and then what you're calling it. Once you click OK, the next thing it's going to ask you to do is to take a thumbnail snapshot of your playset. So just fit it into the box, click OK or click Accept, and that will take a thumbnail picture of your playset, and then it will be created. And you'll get this confirmation saying the playset has been created. Would you like to use it now in place mode? If you say yes, the playset itself will now be attached to your cursor and you'll be able to place it wherever you want. For now, I'm going to click no. This will then allow me to just press delete, and now I can make another one. So this is one of the benefits to using a separate map for making your playsets, is you can just quickly put down the things you want in a playset, select them all, make a playset, press delete, make another one, make a playset, press delete, place the other ones, make a playset, press delete, etc. You can work really quickly. The other two benefits of making playsets in their own map is that, first of all, you're not having your playset being placed amongst it's not interfering with your main map that you might be working on at the time. You can make it off to one side separately. You could, of course, also just use the same map but go off to one side. But obviously, if you're making a largish map and there's not enough room, nice to have its own map, right? And then it's sort of completely separate. The idea is this map is never played in the game. You might even delete this when you're ready to release your project. The point is, while you're making your project, you can have a playsets map that's just for making playsets. And then the other benefit to either building it off to one side or having your own map is that when you take the snapshot, there's nothing else in the picture. So it's very clear what that playset consists of, right? So once you've made a playset, where is it on the interface? Well, it's in your asset archive or library, whatever you want to call it, on the right-hand side. And it's this icon here on the far right, the house icon. So if we click that, we should see our playset, and there's our snapshot that we made. So again, because I made this playset in its own map, it means that all I see in this image are the things in the playset. Okay. If, for example, I load a different map, one of my main ones, and let's fill it up with some stuff. So let's put one of these down, a few of these, maybe some characters. Right? And then I wanted to make a playset, for example, out of this mausoleum and this skeleton. Let me just go underneath the map for a second to get the... Oh, I'll tell you what, I'll do it this way. Oh, it needs to be box mode. Select everything. Shift select the tree and the skeleton. Just make sure it's a square. So when I then turn this into a playset, so let's just quickly do that. Let's come down here and do P. We'll call this mausoleum for now. Click OK. When I take my snapshot, obviously the issue I'm going to have is I can't take the snapshot of my playset without other things being in the picture. These trees are not going to be part of this playset. So it's going to be a little bit misleading, right? Because where are these trees when I place this playset? So that's the reason why I personally like to build playsets off in their own environment, so that the picture reflects what's in the playset and isn't being busied by the rest of your map. However, what you can do, if you do want to make a playset of something that you've already built on your map, then here's how I would suggest going about doing that. Make your playset like I'm doing now. So you select the things on your map that you want to have in your playset, then take a snapshot like I'm doing now. That will obviously create the playset. Say no to this because you obviously don't want to start placing it yet. Go to a blank map or go off to one side on this map. It really doesn't matter which one you do. Let's just go off to one side. Then go to your playsets. Find the playset you just made that's got the incorrect image. Place it again. So just click. Oh, well, there's an issue. For some reason, it didn't have the mausoleum selected. So there's an example of make sure everything is selected. I thought I had the mausoleum selected. So let's just quickly do that again. Again, box mode, please. Okay, shift, click the mausoleum. There we go. Click the skeleton. Click the tree. Just check it's not missing any tiles. Press P. We'll save it over the top. So if you type the same name, you'll get this prompt. Playset already exists and will be overwritten. I'm fine to overwrite that because it's not what I want. Take the picture again. Say no. Right, now, if we go off to one side, or go into our playsets map, whichever, place our playset down. Now what you have is you have your playset on its own without the rest of your map. What you can then do is right click on your playset and capture thumbnail, and you can take it again. And now when I click accept, that's now more, what's the word? That's more accurate to what the playset actually looks like, what it actually consists of. So it gets rid of all the extra stuff that was in the screenshot when it was in my map. So if you are going to make playsets of things you've already placed, which, you know, I can imagine you might want to do, you might make something and go, oh, actually, I want that to be a playset, then yes, you can absolutely do that. But I would also advise once you've made it, place it isolated somewhere, because you can now. Now, once you've made it, you can easily place it off to one side and retake the snapshot so you can just get an isolated picture of what it is. So it's much clearer what the playset actually has in it and what it doesn't have in it, right? Otherwise, it might confuse you because you might be wondering where the extra stuff is, but it's because it was never part of the playset, right? Anyway, I'm going to delete that and we'll go back to our playsets map. So once you've made a playset, go to your playsets tab. There it will be with your thumbnail. And then to place it, as you've already seen, you just click it. And then when you move your mouse cursor back into the map, you'll see this green box. Now, I should quickly explain this green box is a temporary to playsets. Eventually, the idea is for the playset itself to be visible on your mouse cursor. But obviously at the moment, that's a bit more work to implement, but it is going to come to Arduino Box. Just right now, the quickest and easiest way to get playsets working is just to make a transparent green box. Obviously, it's limited use for, being able to see how it's going to be placed. But, in the future, just know that this will eventually render the whole playset. So you'd be able to see everything, the trees, the path, the characters, etc., as you move your mouse around. And you'd also see the rotation. Now notice the pink arrow on the box, that indicates the direction. So if you right click your mouse before you place it, you can rotate where it's going to place facing. And then to place it, just left click your mouse and it will place a copy of that playset. And you can keep clicking and placing multiple playsets. And that's the advantage of playsets, is you can basically you can make a group of things and start placing them around your map really quickly. Now, one thing to also know about playsets is once you've placed them, they are individual assets. So you can go in after the fact and change things. So for example, we might say, I don't want that tree, so you can delete it, right? Now you're not editing the playset itself, so when I replace it, it will still have that tree in the corner there. You're just editing this particular instance on the map, right? So all playsets are is they're just like a stamp tool. So once you've stamped it down, it's literally its own thing on the map. So what you're editing is that own thing. You're not editing the playset, right? But you could go in and, for example, delete a lot of these signs and say, I only wanted a couple of signs or whatever. So you can go in after the fact and tweak things. Let's delete everything. So the next limitation to talk about is the fact that there's a limit to the amount of things that you can have in a playset. And that limit is 256. Now I could quickly demonstrate that by making a 16 by 16 set of tiles. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Zoom out a bit, and this will be 2. So we'll go across here. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. We'll go in the other direction. 14, 15, 16. Okay, so here's a 16 by 16, which basically equates to 256 tiles. If we now select everything and press P, we are allowed to make a playset. But we are now at the absolute maximum. So if I was to place one more thing down, let's say a tree, and I was to do the same thing, so select everything, and include the tree, that would now be 257 things, not 256. So now the moment I press P, we get a warning saying that the number of selected entities, and it tells you how many, so in my case just 257, so one more, exceeds the playset limit of 256. Now, this limit could adjust in time and give you more room. That might happen, for example, when the engine upgrades to engine 3.6. But right now, and possibly for the foreseeable future, that is the limit. I spoke to Justin about whether he would up the limit, but we both agree that you could do that, but the whole point of playsets is not to be making large swathes of a map and saving it as a playset. The idea is it's supposed to be for little repetitive stamps, right? So you shouldn't really be needing to go over 250 objects, right, or assets entirely. However, just be aware that that is a limitation. So if you do have a really complicated room with lots of objects scattered about and characters and things, then you could get close to that limit. So just be aware that obviously it will tell you. So the moment you try to make a playset, it will tell you you can't. You'll have to deselect some stuff. Bearing in mind as well, of course, this is not a limit to how many things you can place on the map. It's just how many things you can save into a playset group. So if I wanted to make this into a playset, I could just select different parts of it, chop it up a bit. Each one would be a separate playset, and then I could snap them back together. So for example, what I could do is I could select this section, save it as a playset, select this section, save it as a playset, and I'd have 4 playsets and then just snap them together like they are on the map at the moment. And obviously the tree in the middle would be, part of it as well. So there are ways around it, but just be aware that is the limitation of how many things can go in it. And that limitation, if I haven't said already, is across all the assets. So it doesn't matter if you've placed 270 tiles, you now can't place any objects, characters, or tiles. That limit is for all of them. So, what's the next thing to talk about? The next thing to talk about is tips for making playsets. So the nice thing about playsets is you can be creative and make whatever playset you want. However, what I would advise, where they work best, is when you make them modular, i.e. they can snap together. That was one of the great things about Neverwinter Nights, is you could just snap maps together really quickly and easily. If you wanted to make a forest, you could select any forest tile that was in the library and they would all just snap together. And you could very quickly start making a map. In order to bring that functionality to playsets, you need to be mindful about how you make your playsets in order for that to work. So let me give you an idea of what I mean. Let me delete this one, we'll create another one. So let's say we want to make a forest, okay? So we obviously want to make our forest quite interesting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a couple, or maybe 3, playsets that are the same size. I'm going to use 3x3, but obviously any size, as long as it's square, will work. So 5x5, 6x6, 7x7. If you start using dimensions that are odd, different from one another, like 2x7 or 5x18 or whatever, then while you absolutely can make a playset like that, it's going to present issues when you start using it a lot if you want a neat map. Okay, so let me sort of demonstrate how sticking to a particular size, how it works really well. So let's say, for example, I've got this grass tile here, and I want to make a path that bends round, right, like that. And maybe we'll put some trees down because obviously we're trying to make a forest. So let's put a tree down, something like that, right? Then I can select everything, press P, and as I say, I would call this 3x3 just so I know how big it is. The theme, and then I'll just call this bendy path. And then take your snapshot. I'll just do that for now. Say no, press delete, so I can start placing another one. So let's now just do a section of grass. A section of forest. So we'll place down some grass, we'll go to trees, and we'll just put a tree on every tile. Again, select everything. Then box mode, not selected. Press P, call it 3x3. Forest. Trees. Take a snapshot. Press delete. And we'll do one more, which is a 3x3 with a path coming in from the side. So where's my path? There it is. Path coming in from the side with a mausoleum. Where's my, as in objects? Now, we've got a slight issue with the mausoleum. In fact, let me change this tile slightly, this playset. Delete that. If I go to the path again for a second, I'm going to build it this way so that they all are built facing the north direction. But you'll notice when I place my mausoleum down, it doesn't line up with the path. Okay, so I'm going to fix that in a second. So I'll place that for now. Then I'm going to select it, go to offset, and I'm going to put 7 into here. And that will just shift it along so it lines up with my path. And I don't think I could fit a tree in, but maybe I can. Yep. Okay, so we'll do that as well. And now I'm going to again select everything one more time. Make sure the mausoleum and the trees are selected. I'm just going to quick spin around, make sure everything is selected. Press P, 3x3, forest, tomb, or something like that. It doesn't really matter what it's called. Click OK, take a snapshot, and say no, and delete. So we've now just quickly thrown together 3 playsets that are of the same group and theme, the same size and theme. So we've got 3x3 and forest, all the same theme. I've named them those things, so I know it's the same size. I know what the theme is. I can't tell what the name is, unfortunately, because we've got a limit to the amount of characters it shows in the asset library. But obviously, you can hover over it, and the tooltip will give you the name. I have suggested to Justin that what we really need in the future is folders. So you could imagine having subfolders in your playsets for the theme. So I can have a forest folder, and then all of my playsets to do with that are in that folder. Therefore, you don't have to put it in the name of the playset itself. It would just be 3x3 and then the name of the asset. Anyway, so the idea now is that because they're a standard size, I can just place them wherever I want them and they'll snap together. So for example, if I want 3 forest tiles over here, I can do that. Then I can come in with my path. I can, let's click that there. So that's coming in from there. I can right click, rotate. That's obviously the wrong way. Can go that way with it. Get this right. Let's go up like that and then come round. See how everything's snapping together, and then I can grab my mausoleum, rotate it, place. Everything just snaps together, right? So if you have a consistent size, you don't really have to worry about lining things up when you place them. You just butt them up right next to one another and they will just click together. So this forest, for example, I can just click here and fill that gappy, right? There are no gaps. Whereas if they weren't a standard size, like 2x7 or something like that, you'll have gaps. So you might have something that looks more like that, right? Where you've got a gap here. Obviously, that's not a problem because you can always go in with the individual tiles afterwards and plug any gaps in. But the nice thing about playsets is if you forward think about making them like almost Lego sets where they can just click together, then, you can work really fast and not have to sort of go in afterwards and fix things. And again, as I say, everything is individual. So if I wanted to delete these trees afterwards, maybe I just wanted to alternate them a bit so it looks a bit more random, maybe go in here and make a clearing or something. You can obviously go in afterwards and tweak your playset, not your playset, your map. But the nice thing is you're able to really build out something like a forest really quickly with these playsets. So let's go back to the topic of limitations quickly. Things to be aware of about the things you place on playsets. So as you know with RPG in a Box, when you place things like objects and characters, you can assign properties and stats to them and stuff, right? So for example, an object, do I have an example? Here we go, plinth. If I select this plinth, I can turn it into a container, for example. I can turn that on and I can, give it a pumpkin or something. And so now this is a container object. It actually does something. It's not just a visual object, it's a container, right? If I was to select this now, let's just do that. Make it a playset called container. And we'll just quickly take an image of it. When you place your playset, notice how the plinth is not a container. It's off. When I select the placed playset and the object that was in that playset, this is off. So this is an example of a setting that is not going to get saved currently. This is again a current limitation. This will be changed in time. But currently, map edited settings don't save. Okay, so things like item container, vehicle, anything you turn on when the thing is placed on the map will not be saved. The only exception to that is things like offset, scale, rotation, and properties. Those are the things that right now Justin has made work, but everything else needs to be implemented. So right now, things like containers, if you turn this into a thingy like a door, that won't be saved, etc. The exception, however, is if you enable these things on the model itself. So for example, if I wanted the gravestone here to be a door for whatever reason, then I would open the model, go to thingies, and I would enable it here. And now every gravestone, this particular gravestone anyway, that's in a playset will place as a door, okay? Because the way playsets work is when you make a playset, you're not actually saving those specific tiles and that specific object or character. You're storing a reference to it. You're saying, save this tile and save this character reference. So when you place your playset, it's not copying and pasting those specific tiles and characters. It's looking them up in your asset library, and you'll see this at the end of the video when I show you how they actually work. This will make a lot more sense, and you'll see why it works this way. But in essence, it's just looking them up. It's like what you're saving is a reference, like a lookup table. You're not actually saving that exact set of tiles. So that's why when it places this object again, it's placing it from your asset library. It's not placing that exact one that you saved. So unless that thing in the asset library has that option enabled, it's not going to place them with that option enabled. So for example, if we could, well we can't, but if we could open up the plinth model and make it a container in the model, we can't, it's not an option to do that, then we could save this as a container, and then every time we place our playset, it would be a container. However, that's not possible because containers are a map editor setting only. But just be aware that in the future, these settings that we have here will save as part of the playset process. But just right now, Justin has to go through and set those up, in time, because also there's a lot to add, right? There's a lot of all the different settings you could have for characters, like behaviors, all the different settings you could have for objects. All those things need to be put into the playset process. So right now they work in terms of replacing loads and loads of assets, but in terms of the settings, you'll need to go in after the fact and do that. So for example, if you had a playset that had a chest in it, then you would have to go in once you've placed your playset and enable that to be a container if you wanted it to not just be a decorative item, okay? Now, one thing to be aware of, let's delete this and place another one, is custom properties, because they do work and there's some things you need to be aware of with them. So let's put a character down. So let's put this skeleton down, for example. Now notice he comes in as a turret. So if I just quickly make this a playset. So test. Doesn't matter about the snapshot right now. If I place this, you'll see he places as a turret. Every time I click, he places as a turret, right? That's because it's on the model, right? If I go open up my skeleton model, you can see in the settings, he is a turret. Yeah, turret is on. If I was to select, go back to my map. If I was to select this particular skeleton and turn that option off and resave the playset, test 2, no, delete. If I was to now place test 2 around, you'll see it still is a turret. And that's because in the model, this is still enabled. On the map, I turned it off, but it doesn't save the settings that you do on the map. It saves the settings on the model, okay? So just be aware of that. However, the exception to that is custom properties. And the reason it's an exception is that's one of the things that Justin has implemented. And he's going to obviously gradually go through and do all the others. But right now, as of this video, custom properties are saving as well. So for example, we can select this skeleton and we can put a custom property on him. Where's custom properties? There I are. He's got a couple already, right? So these are on the model. So just to point those out, I put these on the model already. So if we go to custom properties, those are on the model. But I could add one as well. So I could go to the map and I could say, oh, I want this skeleton to also have a Boolean which tracks if it's a boss or not. I don't know. I'm just thinking up a crazy example. And let's say false. It's not a boss, right? Now if I select everything, save it as another playset, and then place it, even though the model itself doesn't have the boss property, this one does. Okay, so it will save custom properties if you add them while it's on the map before you make the playset. Just be mindful that you do have to make the playset. No, be mindful that the same limitation with not limitation, but the same mechanics of custom properties still applies. So what I mean by that is trying to think how an example of how to show this. Yeah, so if I go to the model and let's delete this boss property for a moment. So we'll stick with the properties that are on the model, okay? If I go to the skeleton and I add a number, let's say, that's his age, right? And save it. If I go to the map editor and select him, he doesn't have that property, right? Because we need to replace the model. And that's the same with the playset. So if I make this playset again, so we'll just call this test 4, getting very creative. Delete that. If I place test 4 and select him, he still doesn't have the age property because he didn't have that property when we saved him in the playset. So if we wanted to have a playset with a skeleton with that property and it's on the model, you need to remember that you need to obviously place that first so that when you select him, he has the property, then make the playset. Okay, so if we now make the playset again, and I'll just overwrite test 4 this time. And we'll just do that, it's fine. And place it one more time. Now he'll have the age property, right? So just be aware, you do have to be mindful of how properties, if you edit the model, you will need to put the model down again if you've already placed it before you make your playsets. But any custom properties you add while it's placed on the map, they will save as well. But also be aware that if I was to place a skeleton down, so let's go to skeleton and place him again, put one in the top corner there. If I was to select this skeleton and delete that property, this skeleton will still have its own properties, right? When you make a playset that's got 2 skeletons with 2 different properties, or, characters with 2 different properties or whatever, do test 4 again. Place. He's still got 3 properties. He's still got 2. So you can have characters with their own individual sets of properties in a single playset as well, even though they're the same character. Okay. So some things will track, some things won't. You'll have to obviously just be mindful of the fact that things like, is it a chest? Does it have a script on it? That kind of stuff. Does it have a behavior? Those sort of things, unless they're set on the model, they won't track. The only things that track right now are custom properties, scale, offset, and rotation, and initial frame. Everything else will need to be set on the model, not on the map. Okay? If you want it to be repeated across your playset. Okay, so that brings us to the end, I believe, of all the in-engine stuff, all the stuff you can do inside RPG in a Box. I'm going to clear house first. Oh yes, no, the last thing I should talk about first of all is once you've got a playset that you like, let's say this, no, that was the bad one, wasn't it? It didn't have a container in it. Let's place the forest down. Let's say you're happy with this and you want to actually share this with the world. What you can do is you can right click on the playset and share to Steam Workshop. Obviously, if you're using the Steam version, then this will come up and you can give your playset a name. It will use by default the name you already named it. Type a description, so you'll typically want to type what it consists of. So in my case, 9 grass tiles and 9 trees or whatever. Take some snapshots and then click upload and it will upload it to your account in your workshop. And obviously you can browse the workshop, subscribe to other playsets, and they'll appear in your project's playsets tab. So you can use other people's as well. So just know that that functionality is obviously there as part of the Steam Workshop. That's one of the benefits of having playsets on Steam. But as I say, they will eventually come to other platforms in the future. So I'm going to clear these out so that we've got no more playsets. And I'm going to sort of take you outside of the engine as I show you where playsets are saved and how they in essence work behind the scenes so you can better understand what's going on with them. And the reason why it's good to really understand what's going on with them is because then you can edit them, which is something that you can't actually currently do in the engine. If we wanted, there are some simple ways we could edit a playset. So for example, if I was to place this down and I, for example, didn't want this tree in the playset, I could always delete it and remake a copy of this playset or save it over the top, right? So it is possible to edit a playset, but you obviously have to be kind of destructive. You have to place it and change it and then save it again. But depending on how complex the playset is, you might have a load of things with loads of offsets and things like that, that making it again is a bit more tedious. So I'm going to show you ways that you can edit the playset without having to be destructive. Okay, so I've cleared house and I've created a playset here that has an example of all 3 assets. So it's got tiles, it's got a couple of trees, so that's an object, and Sarah in the corner there has got a character, okay? So what we're going to talk about now is where are these things stored? So what we'll do is we'll right click on a map and we'll click Open File Location. When you do that, you'll be presented with the Maps folder. If you right clicked on a map, you'll be inside the Maps folder. So go up one folder, up one in your path, and you'll be in your main project folder. Here you'll see a Playsets folder where you'll see your, let's delete that. You'll see your thumbnails that you made for your playsets. So here's the one I just made, playset 1, and you can see Sarah and the trees and the path and everything. But this isn't a actual playset. This is just a picture of the playset. So where's the actual playset stuff stored? Where's the SCN, for example, for our playset? Well, playsets aren't actually a external file. They're not actually like a .scn or anything like that we're used to. They're actually in the game CFG. So if I open this, and you're going to want to open this with an advanced text editor, so don't use Notepad or anything like that. Use Notepad++, TextPad, something like that, or open it in your, developer environment or whatever. So it looks nice and laid out like this. And if you scroll down in the game.cfg, you'll see a playsets category section. And here is the data for your playset. So what I'm going to do now, as crazy as it is I'm going to rewrite all of this by hand. And as I do so, I'm going to explain what every line is doing, just so you can understand this data. Because if you can understand this data and how playsets are actually constructed, then you can edit them a lot easier, right? I'm obviously not going to advise you do what I do, which is write one by hand. That would be crazy. But it's just for this video, just so you can understand line by line as I explain what each bit of data is doing, okay? So what I'm going to do is delete all of this. Save it. And what I probably should have done first is quit the project first, because if I go back in, it's probably going to still have my, oh no, it's gone. Okay, good. So we'll exit our project, because you don't want to be in your project if you're editing the game CFG file. Okay, let's reload it. Okay, so I'm going to quickly explain how to make a playset by hand using just the data. Okay, so the first thing we want to do, if we don't have a category for playsets, is you want to quickly throw a category in. So you do that by opening and closing square brackets and typing the word playsets in there. And that will create, just like we have here, workshop, camera presets, localization, etc. It will create a playset section or category. Okay. So how do you format a playset in data? What you're going to do is you're going to, first of all, type playsets equals, and then you're going to open and close a codex. Okay. Now, just to quickly explain, we're going to be using arrays and codexes a lot in this section. So in CFG terminology, an array is denoted by open and close square brackets like that. Okay, so that's an array. A codex are the curly brackets, the squiggly brackets, whatever you want to call them. Okay, we're also going to be using parentheses, the normal rounded brackets as well. Okay, so just be aware that those are going to be cropping up a lot in this section of the video. So this is what they are. So these are an array, these are a codex, and these are for your coordinates, as you'll see when we get to those. Okay, so because we're going to be opening and closing a codex right now, it's the curly squiggly brackets. And you want to press enter a couple of times in between them so that you can start typing what's in this codex. So the first thing we have after that is the name of this playset. So I will call this CFG playset, just so we know that it's one I made in the CFG. You're then going to do a colon, not a semicolon, a colon, because that will separate the key from the value. So the key is the name of the playset, and then the value is another codex. And again, go in between and press enter a couple of times. So what do we want to be inside this playset? Well, the first thing you type is the type of asset that we're going to place. So you could put characters, or you could put objects, or you could put tiles. Now, I don't know if the order matters because I haven't played with it that much. So you can obviously experiment with putting them in an order that you want, but I would advise sticking with the way it's created just in case. So I'm just going to put objects in mine, not characters. So I'm just going to keep it simple, but you would obviously type characters if you wanted to put characters in first. But I'm going to type objects, then you do another colon, space. Now, because you could have more than one object in a playset, and we might do that, I'm going to open and close an array first, and then within the array, open and close a codex. So the codex is going to be for our specific object we're going to make right now. But if we were going to have more than one, then we would have another codex inside this array, right? So just understand that's what I'm doing. So I might preemptively do that because I know I'm going to put two in. So I'm going to put a comma in between the two codexes, right? But with the first one, I'm going to press enter twice. So in the middle of the first codex, I'm going to press enter twice. And then we put in the properties of our object. So the first property is probably the model. So what's the actual model? In our case, tree. I'll keep it simple. I'll type tree and then put comma, because obviously we're going to have more than one property. We could have initial frame, so 0. But obviously if you wanted your tree to start on a particular frame, you would type, frame number in there. We can have offset. So now I'm going to introduce you to some terminology which you may or may not be familiar with if you're completely new to this kind of stuff. And that's vectors, okay? Specifically, in the case of offset, it's a vector free. You open and close the parentheses, which is the rounded, normal rounded brackets above the 9 and the 0 on the keyboard, right? We're going to type those. Okay. Now, before I tell you what goes into here, let me quickly explain what vectors are in relation to, if you're not familiar with them. Here's a very quick, simple, not only explanation of what they are, but also how we're going to use them. So if I open my images folder, I've got a couple of images here that will explain. So here we have, if you imagine this as a visual representation of the 3x3 playset that I'm literally making right now in the CFG. This is what's called a vector 2, okay? And the reason it's called a vector 2 is because there's two numbers, right? So here we can see that we've got 0, 0, and then 1, 0, 2, 0, etc. So this first digit is, you'll notice that it goes to 2 as it goes across. And this second digit goes to 2 as it goes down, right? And they all change as it goes diagonally, right? So this tile here, for example, is 1 across and 1 down, and it's in the center. This tile is 2 across and then 2 down. So it's a bit like a coordinate system, right? And in a vector 3, so this would be your x and y, and in a vector 3 just adds the extra dimension. So if we go to this image, this is a vector 3. If I could open it, come on. This is a vector 3. So it's got your x, your y, but it's also got your z, which is your height, okay? So this is your standard. If you're using coordinates in RPG in a Box, you'll be familiar with this, right? The x, the y, and the z. This is a vector 3. It's creating a cube, not just a flat square. So in the process of making our playset, we're going to be using vector 2s and vector 3s. This is a vector 3 because it's a coordinate, or it's not a coordinate, it's a sort of offset. So is it offset x, y, and z? In our case, we're not offsetting it at all. So we're going to say 0, 0, 0. So just understand that you have to type the vector into Playsets. Obviously, if you're not making it by hand, you're just editing it, you won't have to type any of this stuff. You'll just need to know what it is you're editing, right? But I'm just pointing out that when you see these words like vector 3 and vector 2, that's what they mean. They're referring to how many dimensions are in this particular property. So we could also have rotation. So if an object is rotated, spelling obviously does matter, as does the format. So just be careful that you're typing exactly what I'm typing if you're following along. Otherwise, it could break the game CFG. So again, I'm not advising people necessarily do what I'm doing. I'm just going through this in the video just to explain what these options mean, what they're doing, so that you better understand how playsets actually work. So rotation then is another vector 3 because it could be rotated in any of the directions. In my case, I'm not going to, but you could do. You could, rotate the tree so it's tilted to the side or something like that, right? So that would then be rotating the middle number, for example. Scale is another thing that we could change. In my case, I'm not going to, but we do need to specify vector 3, 1, 1, 1. Obviously, if you wanted it to be larger, you would put 2, 2, 2, or 1.5, 1.5, 1.5. Or if smaller, you would do 0.5 or 0 or -1 or whatever, right? And then the most important one when it comes to our object is where is it going to be in the playset? So for that, you're going to type tile underscore coordinates plural. So COORDS colon. And then again, because a object or a character, this applies to characters too, because an object or a character could be larger than a single tile, this could take up more than one tile. So what you're actually going to do first of all is create an array, 2 square brackets, and then within the array is the individual tile coordinates that this object might take up. In my case, it's only the size of a tile. So I'm just going to type the coordinates where this tree is going to go. So vector 3, and let's say I want to put this in the middle of my playset. So that will be 1, 1, 0. And again, I don't want it to be up in the air, so I'm typing 0, right? If there was more than one tile, I'd now put a comma and I'd do vector 3 again, and I'd specify that, 1, 2, 0, whatever, right? You'd have to put in the tiles that your object, and obviously I spelled vector wrong, but you get the idea. You'd have to put in the coordinates that the tiles that your object would take up, right? Again, because mine's simple, it's only going to take 1, okay? Now, why is it 1, 1? because if we go back to my vector image, I want it in the center, so that's 1 across, 1 down. And in this example, I am making a 3x3 playset, so I know it's going to go in the center. Okay, we'll keep this open because we'll come back to it again in a second. So that's our first tile, okay? So if we wanted to, we're going to create another one, but if that was the last one, we would not have these curly brackets, we would delete this comma, right? But because I am going to have one more, I'm going to go into the middle of these curly brackets, which is another codex, press enter a couple of times, and I'm actually going to delete these actually because it's easier to copy and paste. So I'll just delete those, select up to the curly bracket that's within the codex, within the array, copy that, paste after the comma, but before the closing array thing. Paste one more time, and I'm going to put this in the bottom right. So the bottom right would be 2, 2. I could put it directly underneath and do 1, 2, but I'm going to do 2, 2. So across 2, down 2. Okay, so 2, 2, like that. And that's placed my trees. But obviously right now there's no tiles for them to go on, so we need to do tiles next. So when you're happy with the objects, you then go to the closing array that's put all your objects inside, put a comma, new line. And before we get to tiles themselves, there's a couple of playset settings we need to tell the playset for tiles. The first one is tile underscore size. Now that's not actually the size of the tiles themselves. That's the tile size of our playset. So what you do is you type colon space, and this is a vector 2, because what we're actually going to be pointing this property at is this image. So because it's a vector 2, what we're telling the playset data now is how many tiles across and how many tiles down is the foot size, if you will, or whatever you call it, the landfall size. There's a word for it, isn't it? I can't remember it at the moment, but you know, the size that it takes up on the ground, right? So in our case, 3x3. So you put 3 and 3, so it's 3 tiles across, 3 tiles down. If we were making a 5x5, you'd have 5 tiles across, 5 tiles down. If it wasn't even, you know, 5 tiles across, 18 tiles down, right? So it's always across is the first number, and then the second number is always going down the screen, right? So in my case, though, it's a 3x3. And this is an important property. You have to get this right because this is going to dictate how much size your playset's going to take up, right? The next property is tile width. And this is actually the size of your tiles. So because all my tiles are 16 by 16, I type 16 in there, okay? So even though you're actually putting in the width, it does kind of include the height as well, because obviously tiles have to be square. So you're also saying what essentially is the height as well. But because they're not separate, there's just one property for it, which is the tile width. Comma. Now we get to tiles as a property. And this is going to be an array after I put a colon. So colon, array, and then a codex inside. Enter a couple of times. And obviously we're going to have 9 of these because we're making a 3x3 grid. So again, what are the properties that can go into an individual tile? The most important is the model. So comma, colon, grass, comma. We can have rotation. Now, I should point out that rotation with tiles is different to rotations with objects and characters. So I'm going to type 0, comma. So notice how the rotation of a tile is not a vector 3. It's just a 0. Why is that? Because tiles don't rotate for 2 reasons. First of all, they don't rotate in 3 dimensions. They only rotate in 1. But also they only rotate in 90-degree angles because they have to snap, right? Because of the grid. So what you type in here is a 90-degree angle. So 0, 90, 180, 270, etc., right? So in my case, I'm not going to rotate it, so 0. You can have initial frame if your tile had different frames that you might want this one to start on. In my case, I don't. Scale isn't a thing. offset isn't the thing with tiles. So I think the only thing next is the most important, which is coord. And this is singular. So don't put an S, because a tile can only go in one space, right? Because it's a tile. It goes in its specific place in 3D space. So coordinate, colon, space, vector free. And then in my case, I'm going to start with 0, 0, 0. So that's where it is in X, where it is in Y, and where it is in Z, comma. Okay. In fact, no, not comma, because that's the last bit of data for this particular tile. So it's important to point out that I'm going to work like this. So I'm going to do these ones, then these ones, and then these ones. Okay. So obviously you can work in any order, but that makes sense for me. So what I'm going to do is do a comma, then select everything from the comma up to the first curly bracket, copy that and paste again. Because I'm not going to have anything besides grass, I'm going to leave the model, but just change the vector now to 1 across, but no down. So that's this one here. Paste again, 2 across, 0 down. So that's the top row done. Paste again. This is going to be 0 across, but 1 down. So that's the start of this line. The next one will be the middle one. So that will be 1 across, 1 down. Oops, 1 down. Paste again. The next one is going to be 2 across, 1 down. That's the this one here. Paste again. Then we have 0 across, but 2 down. So that's this one. Paste again. We have 1 across, 2 down. And then the last one, the last one is 2 across, 2 down, and that'll be the bottom right. And then delete the comma, and that's our tiles, right? And now the last thing we need for our playset is to put a comma after we've done all of the tiles. Press enter, open and close speech marks, voxel underscore size, colon, space, vector free. And what goes in here is the combined size of your tiles, so 16 by 16, multiplied by how many of them are in your 3 by 3 grid. So in my case, that's 48 by 48, 16 high, because that's going to be the height of my trees. So what this is this is the size of the green box that gets attached to your mouse cursor when you place a playset. So just understand that this size here is separate from the workings of the playset. So even if I was to type this incorrectly and make this 1 by 1 by 0 or something, your playset will still be the same size. It's just that when you go to place it, it will look like it's going to place a really, well, I'll show you. Let's deliberately make this 1 by 1 by 16, for example. Okay. Anyway, so that's how you make a playset. And obviously, if you're going to have more than one playset, you'd now put a comma here, and then you type in another name of a playset, so CFG, playset 2, etc., and go through it all again. I'm not going to bother doing that. You just need to make one for now. Okay. Now, the other thing I did leave out, but just important to know, is another property that you can use for things like objects and tiles. I'll do it for one of my trees. Let's say this one is just before you close out, we could add in properties as a key. Oops, if I could type it, properties, colon, and then that would be a codex in and of itself. So open and close curly brackets, and then you'd have your properties. So I might have is ground, and then, sorry, it's a tree, isn't it? So is acorn, I don't know, is an acorn tree, and then colon, and then true, for example. So that would be a Boolean property, right? So just like you make custom properties in RPG in a Box, that's how that, if you want to put a property on something, that's how you do it. You create a properties property. It's a codex, and inside that codex is the key and the value of the properties you want to store for that object or character or tile in your playset. And then obviously you'd have a comma there because it's not the last thing to go into this particular object. I'm not obviously going to bother with properties right now, but just to show you that's there. Now, what I advise you do, whether you're editing something or making something like I've done here from scratch, just select everything first, up to Playsets, and copy it. So Control C, then save. So Control S, just in case, because if there is a mistake here, this will be deleted. Not the whole CFG, but this playset stuff will be deleted. Okay, if it tries to open it and it can't because there's mistakes here, like a wrong comma or something like that. So copy it first so you don't have to write it again if you need to. You can just paste it back and take a look and see what it is you made a mistake on. But let's see what happens. So if I now switch to RPG in a Box again and reopen my project, now I've got that code in the CFG. With any luck, if I open my Playsets map, go to the Playsets tab, there is my CFG playset. So great. So I'll just quickly Alt-Tab back to the CFG. If we reload it, you'll see that what it does is it actually formats it a bit differently. It'll add a load of spaces in. So if you pay attention to these numbers, for example, you'll see they'll suddenly space out when I hit reload. Discard. Yeah, you see they sort of space out a bit more. That's how it wants to lay them out, but all it did was just space out my stuff. But in essence, because it's still there, it means it was valid. So we can now go into RPG in a Box and we can click this, and here's our 1x1x16. So you see how it's really small. The box is really small. But notice how the grey directional line, the grid, has a larger 3x3 black space in the center. That's actually our playset. Okay, so even though we've made a really small green volume box with the arrow on it, the actual playset will still place the size we've set it to in the settings, which is the 3x3 and what the tiles are and the objects are. So the voxel size property is purely just for the size of the box. So obviously you're going to want that to be precise, not for any technical reasons, but just so that when you place your playset, it makes sense. It's easier to place others. For example, lining this one up, it's a little more fiddly. Obviously, I can use the black squares to do that, but it would be nicer if I could just use the green box. So I'll quickly exit back to Game Manager, go to the config file and put this back to what it should be. So 48 by 48 by 16. Save it, go back to my project, go to Playsets, select the playset, and now it's the correct size for my handwritten playset, right? So the point is we've written this playset entirely in the CFG. I'm not saying you would ever do that, because why would you when you can just place them, and it's far more intuitive to do it in the editor. But hopefully by me going through line by line what this data is and what a playset contains, you can start to better understand how it's working. But also, if you want to quickly change something, you can just come into here. For example, if the coordinate for your tree was wrong, you can just change that, and all of a sudden it's in an entirely different place, right? So, or if you want to change the scale of something, you can come back into here and change the scale of it without having to remake the playset, right? You can just change the reference, and then every time you place it, it will have a different reference. Obviously, we don't have a screenshot because we made it by hand, but we can just place it, right-click, take a thumbnail, and say accept, and now there's our thumbnail, right? So we've completely made a working playset in the CFG. So that is in essence all there is to explain about playsets. Obviously, it's important to point out that when it comes to playsets and their coordinates, they are their own isolated universe. So if you were to have another playset in here, it would have its own set of 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, etc. So you can have the same coordinates in different playsets, right? They each have their own set of these coordinates. So it means it's very simple to move things around and see where things are placed. Because, you don't then have to have a second playset that then has to take these into account. No, that's not how it works. Each playset has its own set of these coordinates. So a second playset would have its own 001020, etc. if it was a free buy through. Anyway, so that will wrap up this video on playsets. Hope you found it interesting and useful. Any questions about them, feel free to ask in the Discord. For now, that'll wrap up this video. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for the next tutorial.